Good morning, guys. My name is Mason Hunt. I am the Assistant Director with the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty. Our first session of the day, Doing Business North America, History of Economic Freedom Indices. Today we have two panelists with our moderator, Ross Emmett. Ross Emmett is the Director for the Center for the Study of Economic Liberty. He's also a Professor of Economic Thought with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership here at ASU. His teachings deal primarily with the central questions of comparative economic governance. Why do some nations fail when others succeed? And what is the relationship between basic economic institutions and their legal, cultural, and political contexts? His research interests include the history of economic thought, especially the work of Frank Knight and the Chicago Schools of Economics. Prior to joining ASU in 2018, Emmett taught political economy and also in the political theory and constitutional democracy major at James Madison College and Michigan State University. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Manitoba in Canada. Rob Lawson is with the Bridwell Institute at SMU. He holds a Phil-and-Wider Chair in Economic Freedom and directs the Bridwell Institute for Economic Freedom in the Cox School of Business at Southern Methodist University. He is the co-author of the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World Annual Report, which presents an economic freedom index for over 160 countries. He is the co-author with Benjamin Powell of the Amazon bestseller, Socialism Sucks, Two Economists Drink Their Way Through Unfree World. Lawson earned his PhD and Master's in Economics from Florida State University and his BS in Economics from the Honors Tutorial College at Ohio University. Jorge Rodriguez is the founder and CEO of the Puerto Rico Institute for the Economic Liberty, a free market think tank in Puerto Rico. He is also the founder of PACIV, an international industrial automation engineering firm servicing the life sciences industry. Jorge was a fellow at Harvard University, graduating from the Advanced Leadership Institute program, and where ILE was his final project. George is a graduate of the Owner President Management Program. He holds an MBA from the University of Puerto Rico and a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Syracuse University. Please welcome our panel. And take it away, Ross.
Am I mic'd already? Oh yeah, right, I am mic'd. Okay, good. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to toss some softball questions at our panelists and probably be an active participant in the conversation. So I'll just go ahead and let me just get started. So I want to ask, I'd like to ask you what two terms mean to you. So let's start with the first one. What does free enterprise mean to you? Who wants to start?
To me, it means prosperity. You know, it's opportunity, it's upward mobility, and it's basically the avenue to go after your dreams.
So Adam Smith talked about the propensity to truck barter and exchange, and human beings have a natural propensity to do that. We want to exchange with each other, and so free enterprise is the free ability to truck barter and exchange. That is to say, to buy, sell, hire, fire, import, export, et cetera, without interference.
I hope to hear if there are any other additions later when we have a Q&A, ability to speak from the floor. I'll be interested if you disagree or have additional units you would add to those terms. When we talk about economic competitiveness, because this was the title of the session, on economic competitiveness, what's the usual unit of analysis that we think of?
So let me start there. I mean, I used to actually ran an institute for competitiveness once, and so I had some reason to think about that word and what it means. And in a lot of ways, I think it's a terrible word. But to your earlier point, freedom means the freedom. Economic freedom means the ability to compete. If you're running a business on one side of the street, I have the economic freedom to start my business that competes with yours. So, at the end of the day, competitiveness and freedom go hand in hand. A free economy will be a competitive economy almost by It's not a definitional thing, but by design, it'll happen. When we measure competitiveness, though, we typically do that at some political jurisdiction level. We do it by the state, Arizona, or we do it by the nation, United States. We sometimes do it at the level of a firm. You can say, how competitive is this firm? But the concept of competition doesn't necessarily correspond to a nation state or a state like Arizona. But for measurement purposes, we want to aggregate the units like that, and so that's typically how it gets done.
The way I see it, I see competitiveness like the result of how free is the market. So to me, when you have high competitiveness, it's because you have easy accessibility to the market. And I see in a sound market with that easy accessibility, then it represents the talent, creativity, and innovation of its people. The lesser you have on a market accessibility, then the less capability you have to know what are the talents, the creativity, and the innovation of those people.
Economists used to measure competitiveness in terms of, you sort of alluded to this, Rob, the number of competitors that we have in an industry. More is considered better. But today we often point out that potential competitors are just as important, if not more so, than actual competitors. That is, a competitor from a firm in a different industry might jump into your industry if you're not effective, right? And so what examples do you, aside from Amazon, which does everything, right? What examples of this kind of competitiveness changes do we see today? And what I'm going to also ask, so if you want to jump in on that too, what role does government have in situations where the nature of competitiveness is changing?
So, I teach MBA students microeconomics, and this is a point I make with them actually, is if you ever noticed when you're driving out in the rural countryside and you might encounter a small town and there's one gasoline station, and the gas price at that one gasoline station actually isn't hardly any higher than it is in the city, where in the city there's thousands of gas stations. It's $3.50 a gallon in Phoenix, but if you drive 3 miles away, you'll see some rain. Why aren't they gouging? They're the only gas station for 4 counties. Why aren't they gouging the local residents and charging them $4 or $4.50? Well, the answer is because the second they tried to do that, another gas station would come in. And so that's the critical thing for competition, is openness to entrance. Economists talk a lot about barriers to entry. And so for me, rather than counting the number of firms, like there's only one firm, you would say, well, it's a monopoly, it's outrageous, we should regulate this gas station in rural, some rural
Georgia.
city because it's the only gas station. Well, counting the number of firms is a terrible way to understand competition. The proper way to understand competition is to talk about the regulatory barriers that would prevent another gas station from coming in. Now, to be sure, what would happen? I'm sorry, I'm going into professor mode. What would happen? What would happen if this one gas station in the middle of nowhere was told that no one can build another gas station in town? Well, then they'd raise it to $4 or $4.50. They would gouge the local customers, but they don't do that typically, and that's because of the openness of the market.
I'll give you the business answer. There used to be 3 main ways that you competed. You competed by cost, which is very easy to copy. You competed by process efficiency or by product quality. They were understood to be 3. And now with technology, you have a 4th way, which is the hybrid, where you have examples like Uber. It could be lower, but also at a very high process efficiency. So you have cost, and so you have 2 of them in the hybrid. So in a way, the competitors now can come from many different areas, not so much from one of those competitive advantages that you had, you know. And I think you can see it in car industry. You could see it where they went in, you know, some of the brands that you had before you have the European brands, the BMWs, Mercedes, and some of them went in there that were in the low, you know, on the low cost, and they went high quality with a different brand. So to me, it's the more sound your market is, the more those different type of competitive advantage can be expressed for the benefit of the people that are the consumers.
An example that connects with yours, Jorge, was it's what happened when President Reagan agreed to help the car companies in North America by restricting importation of Japanese cars. At that time, Toyota only had one brand, Toyota. Honda only had one brand, Honda. And you knew what a Toyota car was, and they were considered to be inferior to American cars. And Reagan bowed to the American car manufacturers and put a lid on the number of cheap Japanese vehicles. So what did Japan automakers do? Toyota created Lexus. Is it Lexus? Yeah, Lexus is Toyota, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So they created Lexus, a expensive car. And they could create so now suddenly American car manufacturers are facing not only cheap Japanese cars, but expensive Japanese cars that haven't had the burden of a long history. You know, they're able to leapfrog to a high state technology used car, and it's, you know, suddenly America is now competing with a bigger Japanese entrant than just the one that they were trying to shut off the flow to, and that caused major changes in the American car industry. I lived in Michigan for close to 15 years, and every single plant had been redone. A bunch of course, of the U.S. car manufacturers at about the same time, in response to what Toyota and Honda did, started manufacturing cars outside of Michigan. And Tennessee was one of the obvious locations, in South Carolina as well. And so you had that kind of, the attempt to regulate competition from an external competitor led to all kinds of changes in technology, changes in pricing, changes in styles, et cetera, internally as well as with external agencies. And so the role of government in controlling this kind of change in competitiveness actually backfired, right? And eventually these policies were not renewed. In many industries in the U.S., competitors face internal barriers to entry that were granted by state or city governments to protect existing businesses. Licensing restrictions we've heard about, but we maybe want to talk about again. So what issues do you see that are important to us right now in terms of various ways licensing restrictions might be one you want to talk about, but other important internal barriers to entry?
I can start. I mean, obviously in Puerto Rico, we are the kings of regulations, you know, and most of them are driven. The nature of being an island gives you a closed market, a limited market, and if you're that insular, you want to protect your markets, and then those drive significant lobbying for local regulations. And what this kills, obviously, the entrepreneurial spirit of your small businesses or startups that want to start. Our biggest one, number one in Puerto Rico, and it comes out in all the indexes that we're doing now, is the permits. So permits are huge, and the main issue with permits is that the startups and the small businesses that want to grow, this becomes a significant barrier. When you're a large company, they can put these regulations, whether it's labor regulation or taxes or others, and you have more resources to overcome them. But if you're small or you're trying to start a business, every single one of them is a huge barrier, right? So permits, ironically, in Puerto Rico, we have a word for it. It was included in the FNA of this year by one of the co-authors. We call it permisología. So we actually have a word for permits. And permit is, obviously you understand what permiso is permit, and then logía is the science. So it is literally a science, but it has killed the spirit for people to say it's going to be easy. It takes, just to give you an idea, it can take you from 6 to 8 months to start any business because all the complexities. And occupational licenses, to add to what he just is our very first policy project. We call the State Department, just to give you a quick idea of how things go there. We call the State Department in charge of occupational license. They didn't know how many licenses there were in Puerto Rico. Why you wanted to study? I said, well, because this is a barrier. Many of these occupational licenses are for low income, and many of these have their own business. Refrigerator, AC, air conditioning, or plumber, or electrician. So we want to know how many there is. No one knew. Took a year and a half. We have 129 licenses. We have 12 occupational licenses that no other state has. And we have 36 additional occupational licenses that 4 states or less have, always different states. All of these are a great signal that there is lobbying to create a protective market, right? So it was a great project to showcase the basic principle of special interest, controlling their market. But ironically, what that does is doesn't increases the barriers of entry. Obviously, no one can enter, but it kills innovation because there is very low competitiveness. And if you don't have that innovation, you don't have, new money coming in. You don't have better willingness to pay of clients, and obviously better quality and prosperity.
It's awfully hard to say what the most damaging regulation is, partly because the downstream effects of regulation are frequently more important than the actual regulation itself. David mentioned the sugar quota program, which more or less doubles the price of sugar in the United States. And doubling the price of the sugar in the United States is bad for American consumers because we all eat sugar in one way or another. But it's not like we're all going to go to the poorhouse because of it. But because of the sugar quota, the cola companies have switched to corn, and so there's an increased demand for corn. So now corn prices are higher. We also have acreage allotments, which restrict the supply of corn from the Department of Agriculture, so that makes the corn prices higher. It's another regulation. But of course, we feed cows corn because our cows are glorious in America because we feed them corn and not hay. Grass-fed beef is an abomination in my Texas opinion. And so
Canadians have a different view.
Right, yeah.
Right? So we don't have as much marbled.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Marbling,
it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible. So the point is now what's happening is we're raising the price of corn, and people are now switching to grass feeding their cows because the price of corn is. It's just one thing, and each one of these things is harming consumers in one way or another. It's deviating us from what we otherwise would choose. And when you add them all up, it's almost it's almost impossible to add them all up. Actually, it's such an interwoven economy. And then with one final point, Ludwig von Mises once talked about the sort of dynamics of intervention or something like that, and like we have to intervene to fix the effects of the previous intervention. So now we have to, just to take an example, now we have to subsidize poor peoples because they can't afford food. Well, why can't they afford food? Well, we just doubled the price of sugar, which has risen the price of corn, which, it's just one new regulation has to fix the effects of the previous regulation, and it's just sort of this never-ending cycle. And it's frustrating, right? And even economists, I mean, we're very smart, but this is such a complicated economy. The economy is so complex that it literally is impossible to actually itemize and account for the costs of regulations as they sprinkle and weave through the economy.
So now we have a picture about economic competitiveness. Let's talk about measuring the competitiveness or the economic freedom of units like nations or states or even cities in terms of the degree, shall I say, of economic freedom that they provide. And Rob, I wonder if you can start by just outlining, because you have the sort of longest standing and biggest kind of picture sort of look at this. So describe the economic freedom of the world, or North America, whichever one you want to start with, reports.
Well, sure, I'll start with the economic freedom of the world, which came first. So about 30 years ago, I was a young graduate student, I started working on a project called Economic Freedom of the World, which is an economic freedom index at the national level. So we have index scores for economic freedom for the United States, Singapore, Congo, Bangladesh, and 165 countries in total. And what we're trying to do is measure the degree to which the country is free enterprise or economically free. And we do that by basically collecting a lot of data. It's a massive data collection exercise. And we get data from the World Bank, IMF, World Economic Forum, PricewaterhouseCoopers, the Economist Intelligence Unit, I can keep going. So we get all these data and everything from measuring how big the government is in terms of taxes, because one of the ways governments interfere in free enterprise is by taking the fruits of your labor, they tax your income. We measure the security of property rights, and that's in many ways the most foundational area I think that we should talk about is your property right and the ability to have an efficient core system to protect property. We measure the soundness of the monetary system, the trade with the external world, both in goods, capital, and also some freedom of travel. And then we measure a bunch of regulations. So 1/5 of our index is explicitly regulation, measurements of different kinds. And we turn a crank, and all these numbers get put into the computer. I turn the crank, and numbers come out. And in the index that we have right now, Singapore is the #1 rated country. Hong Kong is #2. The U.S. is around 6th, I think. And down at the bottom of the list, 165, is Venezuela. And so we did this index. We've done it every year since the mid-90s. We have data back to 1970. So for scholars, it's a very valuable data set. And of course, it gets a fair bit of attention by policymakers because politicians, it turns out, you can talk about, oh, this regulation is terrible, this tax is terrible, this policy is bad, but they don't listen to you. But if you tell them, Idaho has a better score than Arizona, they're like, what? So the ranking of in our case, nations, has been a very powerful tool to get the attention, at least, of policymakers. And then just to segue from that, about a decade or so after the Economic Freedom of the World started, we began to do a companion project called Economic Freedom of North America that measures the economic freedom environment at the subnational level. So 50 states, I think it's 9 of the Canadian provinces and 25 or so Mexican states. So it truly is a North American Economic Freedom Index, trying to measure it at the subnational level. There's a lot less variation there. I mean, Texas is freer than California, but the difference in California and Texas is small compared to, say, the difference between Singapore and Venezuela. So the subnational variation is lower, but it's definitely there and it's measurable.
Mm-hmm. And your interest is in how Puerto Rico can fit into these reports because, am I right, Rob, that the Economic Freedom of North America report doesn't deal with the Canadian territories or with entities like Puerto Rico in the United States, or is Puerto Rico included? Rob?
Puerto Rico is included in the United States.
Okay.
But uniquely, we have a very unique situation, and then we have about 30 some variables, I believe, that are more at the old government that are our own, So we could be kind of in both.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start by thanking. I'm glad I have Rob here because Bob, because and you, because we started this 3 years ago. I ran a business for 25 years, so I can answer your question in terms of running a business. It's a specialty service business, engineering firm, and also had offices in Ireland and 3 states and Puerto Rico. So I could see the impact of regulations, in different places, and the taxes and all that. But certainly, one of the reasons for me to leave my business and dedicate my life now to this is because I see that this hinders into entrepreneurship. There is 6 pillars in the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, and one pillar is policy. In Puerto Rico, we worked since 12 years ago trying to get the economy going with entrepreneurship, but no one was addressing the policy matter, right? And I lived it because the hardest place for me to do business was my place compared to even Ireland, But I wanted to thank you guys because one of our very first initiatives at the Institute when we started was to get into the radar screen of the US Congress, of the people in Puerto Rico and in the mainland, right? And I reached out, and I was more than welcome, and it has been a significant impact. Just so you know, the EFNA, we came out the first time last year. We had about 17 million audience impressions through social media and all our main newspapers, TV, and radio. And then the Doing Business North America, the same thing happened, 15 audience and millions, because we're kind of putting reason and knowledge and data into what has been happening for many years. The bankruptcy, and also we have the largest outbound migration, and we are, as you may know, bankrupt. We're the largest bankruptcy of any municipality in the United States, over $130 billion. So basically, I wanted to thank you, Ross, and thank Stephen that is here. Glad to see him, and Mason, and the people of Fraser, because we went into these indexes, and it has really showcased. So in my case, by being a specialized service industry, labor laws, we are the only non-at-will. We have labor laws that are more stringent than Ireland, and it showcases in the indexes. So now you can put, we have that we're the number one, the highest taxes country jurisdiction in the world, 39% for businesses. And basically, many other taxes that no one knew, and all this is now captured in these indexes, right? So it is great that basically at the level of a labor regulation is significant. For specialized service industry like mine, that's the biggest one. Basically, my human resources department is the government, and then taxes is huge. But the third one is how big the government is. So we have the largest government per capita, right? And we're the poorest of all the jurisdictions. So basically, you're financing whoever is impeding you from prospering, right? And I just wanted to share with you guys the importance of these indexes, of putting, data and reasoning into what happens on people's everyday life, and then be able to communicate that to the policymakers and stakeholders is instrumental. We partner 100% with academia and with national or state-based think tanks and researchers to give significant credibility to the data, which then the policymakers are more than welcome. Last but not least, obviously, we have the results are there. Number one in poverty, 3 times more poor than Mississippi. income, our income is 13,000 something. Mississippi is much higher than ours, so we're highest inequality of any U.S. So we had all the end results that you demonstrate on your studies. We didn't have the data that tells you that that's where you're going to end up, and now we have that. And as a result, wanted to mention that we have one governor that is only one candidate for governor that is including in its platform economic freedom, economic liberty. We didn't know what these concepts were. We were not in any of these. We're also in the Institute for Justice License to Work. We're getting into the Arbich Institute Occupational State Index. But the fact that you shed light with reason, knowledge-based research and to these subjects, and you compare yourself. Remember, the two main parties in Puerto Rico are either statehood or Commonwealth, so they both want to be part of the U.S. And then you tell them that you are at the bottom. We are at the bottom in all the list, and way down. I mean, not even close to the lowest. They react. They say, "Wait a minute, I'm asking for statehood, and I mean, if I'm so far away, I'm not going to look like them, right?" So it has been very valuable to let them know, look, you're barking up the wrong tree, and that's what the data is saying, especially with institutions that you guys are in that give credibility to what is being put out. And we produce everything in Spanish and English, so we send all this information to U.S. Congress, which has a lot of involvement in this, and that's what making politicians then react, because they don't want to, they hate that we are at the bottom and it's being showcased. Obviously, it doesn't make them feel proud. In a good way, it's also giving them which line items, We had the mayor of San Juan already talked to us, which are the line items I need to work on to improve this, right? And to get better. So certainly what I lived for 25 years is captured in there as a business leader. And I think it gives great incentive for them to react when you're comparing yourself to others and telling them what they're seeing on the end results.
Thank you. I'll just take a moment to say a word about the Doing Business report that you have in front of you, Doing Business North America report that you have in front of you. And it's a little different than the Economic Freedom of the World reports and the Doing Business report that the World Bank organized, in that we realized that the unit of analysis is easier in North America for us to actually look at cities and not just states, provinces, and nations. We can take it further down because Americans measure everything. So we have lots of measurement issues at the local level. So the Doing Business report measures the same kinds of activities that the Economic Freedom of the World and Economic Freedom of Countries reports do, and basically, but it's organized around the life cycle of a business. So how easy is it to start a business? How easy is it to get the regulatory permits that you need to hire people, to get access to electricity, water, et cetera? And you sort of follow the life cycle of the business. There's all the kind of startup things, and each of those are categories. And then there's also the question of how easy is it to get out of business, and obviously in that context, bankruptcy issues are a federal jurisdiction. So the United States only has one jurisdiction for bankruptcy. So we have it included in the report, but it's for the United States, it's all the same, and in fact, they're very similar to what other units around in North America have. There are other places, for example, where you're not allowed. There are some places in the world where you're not. Israel, for example. In Israel, you cannot go bankrupt. You're not allowed to go bankrupt. So you can't manage a company and have it go out of business. There's no capacity to go bankrupt. So it's an interesting. Israel is called Startup Nation, but all the startups that happen are spin-offs of the big companies in Israel and so they have these big companies that are their backstop. If they fail, the company that originally financed them will kind of bring the employees back into the business. So the Doing Business North America project was just a slightly different take on this, was to try to do it at the city level. So we have obviously elements of the measurement which are at the state level or are at even the national level, but the differences come all the way down to the city level and the city regulatory level. At the moment, we have actually, for a measurement reason, we're not able to include Canada. Canada does not use per capita income. It only uses average income, median income for a measurement. And so you can't get that. You can't get the per capita income level for cities in Canada. That's caused a whole bunch of problems for us in the index. And so for the moment, we're going to try to work with the Fraser Institute and try to figure out an answer to that. And then the other the Mexican data we haven't been able to have access to for the last little while, so we're still trying to figure out what to do about including Mexican data. You'll find in the 2002 report, you'll find that those elements are missing. So we're still struggling to figure out solutions to that. Do you think I should? Let me open the floor for questions from the audience. Questions you might have. Tiago, go ahead. Oh, yeah, you're waiting for the mic.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tiago. I wanted to ask Jorge about the permitología. I like that word a lot. Permitology, I guess, would be in English, maybe. I don't know. Permitology, that's interesting. Where does that come from? Is it institutional, cultural? Where does that gap come from, right? Where does that permitology of Puerto Rico stem from? And is it cultural, institutional, and is it your perception that this gap has been closing in recent years? Is it getting better or worse relative to other American states? Not in absolute terms, right? Relative to the other states. Is it getting better?
First of all, the word doesn't exist. Permisología doesn't exist. It's barbaric, you know? And basically, ironically, when you separate the word and analyze it, it tells you it's the science of permitting, you know? But it doesn't exist as a word. And we use it to say, you know, this is how bad it is that, we have a word that tried to capture the mess. There's been 4 permit reforms in Puerto Rico in the last 20 years. Permits has a way to inform people. I remember, let me go back. I remember when I was going to do the first FNA, that Fred asked me, what's your poverty level? What's your inequality? He had me all the end results, and I sent him what I found. And he's like, oh boy, it's not going to be good, you know. And we were at the very bottom because, so permits has a way to tell you, right in the moment, people is upset. People is very upset to this day. They don't for reforms because people complain, you know. It hasn't changed anything because they are not changing the requirements. They've all kept the same requirements. They just move which agency does them and at what time you do them, you know. Basically, by the way, we're doing occupational license, and the second policy project we're working is on permits. So it hasn't changed for 20 years. And as an engineer, I tell them, well, this is what happens if you're not changing, you know, what you're doing, just how you're doing it. you're going to have the first thing you do is you look at your watts, and you analyze if you need that. So basically, they reach out to us. They say, what are we going to do? By being in the bankruptcy, I don't know if you know much what's going on. We have a U.S. Congress law. It's called PROMESA. It's a law to restructure the debt, but also to execute the structural reforms that need to happen. So one thing I have as a think tank that no other jurisdictions have is I have a bankrupt territory, and I have a federal law saying you need to make structural changes to not end up again on this matter. One of the structural projects is permit. The other one is occupational license. There's many others, taxes, so they are being required to change. And what we're doing is we're taking the 10 jurisdictions, basically the government hire academia. We just facilitate, and we told them we need academia to look at all the requirements and compare with the 10 best ease of doing business jurisdictions in the US, okay? And by the way, the list of requirements is 3 pages long. No one knew how many requirements there were. I mean, this is how things happen. They keep putting laws on top of laws, then everyone is grabbing a portion, a government agency, and no one wants to let go. So what we're doing is figuring out how many requirements there is. That project has been completed now, and now we're reaching out to these 10 jurisdictions to give us what are your requirements to open a cafeteria, what are your requirements to open a clinical lab, and how do you go about it at the requirement levels, and then let's find out how you do it. But the how, we think, is much easier once you have the what's defined. I believe this policy project could make a difference. The other ones haven't done anything. But as you know, being in the state where we are, with people, very hard, people is complaining. So politically, this is the one project that has been brought up in the last 20 years, the 4, years of government by the last 4 governments. They've all tried to fix it. So we wanted to piggyback in that because there seems to be a political interest about it, and it's like, we published the DBNA, and young entrepreneurs and small businesses, they went on ballistic. You see? It's really hard. So hopefully now, but the needle hasn't moved because of what I told you, but hopefully now they will try to, with what they're seeing on the results that we're coming up, they would like to expect. They just need the science. I believe another issue on this with governments is that they've never hired the academia and to compare with other jurisdictions and do like a strong, with strong intellectual fortitude and objectivity and analytics, look at the data and try to see where you can improve, It's always been like independent researchers that they all hire, and probably they don't want them to look that bad, And with us, that's not going to happen. We're going to say it as it is, right? So hopefully this time will be, something good come out of it.
Yes.
Question for Ross. Could you describe some of the surprises that came out of your ranking exercise? For instance, the one that jumps out at me is Philadelphia, number 11. Can't be. So.
Yeah. Mason, you have any comments about that? Or is that just a measurement?
I don't have any comments. I have to look at the data to see why. Off the top of my head, I would assume that probably through specific local ordinances like parking minimums, or also property taxes, minimum wage. I have to look at specifics.
I can say that we have been an active conversation with the Chamber of Commerce from Philadelphia, and right before COVID, we were actually going to appear at the City Council and talk about Philadelphia and its regulatory state, and obviously COVID postponed that, and we've been trying to get back in conversation with them, along with several other chambers, where we're trying to get insights as to what they're looking at and what we want to do, and encouraging them to help finance keeping the Doing Business North America report going forward. Yeah, no, I mean, it would if they improve, but they are certainly looking to improve things, and having lived on the East Coast, having been in Philadelphia quite a number of times, or in Pennsylvania quite a number of times, some of the dynamics, the social dynamics that you might expect are playing a role. The capacity for minority entrepreneurs to get access to space or things like that is difficult. So you end up with a variety of different, the questions are, what are the things that are driving what happens, and like who's capturing rents from having this high barrier to entry, and then also what can how can we provide data that helps show what the reality is, and the comparison. The people in Philadelphia, for example, are very interested in showing where they're different with New York or with Washington D.C. or sort of they're looking at who they consider their competitors and trying to figure out how to improve themselves.
Ross, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't know, and Ross or Mason can correct me if I'm wrong, but the Doing Business project at the World Bank level, which is the global one for countries, it was explicitly designed to be a de jure measure. So it looks at the actual written law, saying, right, what does the law actually say with respect to starting a business? And frequently the case is that the law itself isn't terribly onerous. So maybe it's one form, let's say, and the form looks fairly simple. But the practice of that may be completely different. So what you're picking up here may be that Philadelphia, perhaps, I'm just speculating here, I really don't know this, but it may be that Philadelphia is one of those places where the de jure policy isn't terrible, the paper on paper, but de facto, like when you show up with your piece of paper, they're like, sorry, we're closed, come back tomorrow, or something like that. So that is, that there's a advantages and disadvantages to measuring de jure versus de facto. For better or worse, the Doing Business project, at least the one I'm most familiar with, the global one, was a de jure one. And that's sometimes where that little disconnect between what you're thinking is reality and what the rankings are.
And we have made the assumption that in the United States, in most cities in the United States at least, the two are pretty close together.
Relatively.
And but there could be city level distinctions, but we haven't tried to capture those yet. We'll have to see what happens as we move the project forward, if we discover that there are significant issues. One of the biggest significant issues for the Doing Business North America project is that Canada does not report per capita income. So they don't measure per capita income for cities. So they do it as median income for the entire province. So they don't, and of course, I lived in Manitoba, rural Manitoba, especially way up north, it has a very different income picture than Winnipeg, Manitoba, the capital city, and really the only city for Manitoba. And so we know that there are differences that exist in that kind of situation, but we can't even compare Winnipeg with American cities because we have a different income measurement. Median income is the Canadian measurement. There's only 2 cities in Canada which get special attention and with an income measure that's closer to per capita income for that city, and that's Toronto and Vancouver, which of course are the 2 biggest cities in Canada, and they get special attention. So we don't know how to deal with that difference of the measurement of income between per capita and median, if you ever come up with a solution.
You have a question over there?
Yeah, other questions?
Steve? Oh.
You have electricity on the list here.
Yes.
But you mentioned water briefly, but isn't that increasingly, in Arizona, of course, that's an increasingly interesting question when water would be its own category.
Yeah. Mason, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, Ross mentioned water. I think that was Tom. We don't measure water in the report. That is something we definitely include in future editions. I think we're always looking to explore to add new variables. But I'll say that was a little bit on my loss.
An assumption.
Well, we don't do any water.
Yeah. But it is becoming a bigger issue in Arizona because of some jurisdictions may be able to exclude other jurisdictions from having access to water because there's been an assumption that water would be accessible to, say, a specific development, but then it's changed in such a way, or it's being enforced in such a way that they only get that water if the host city agrees to let them have it. So there are actually some neighborhoods where they're having water trucked in and they don't have water provided via municipal or other unit. So,
I'm glad that she brought electricity. Just wanted to point out that it was the one that got the most attention. Permits and electricity is the main issue, not even taxes. In Puerto Rico, we have the highest, as you may know, it's also a bankrupt agency. It was owned by the government. It was a monopoly. The hurricane destroyed it, and now it has been privatized through the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Congress. They are privatizing it, but basically it's the most expensive of any place in the U.S. in Puerto Rico, and it's the 95% of our businesses are small, medium-sized. They have less than 50 employees, and electricity becomes trivial for a small business, a cafeteria. We are in the tropics, it's very hot, so air conditioning is always needed. And it becomes, energy is kind of their biggest barrier once they get the permits. Then energy becomes the next one. So the media had a blast with the fact that energy was in the report, certainly because no one has given the angle that energy becomes a limiting factor for small businesses to be able to be established and sustain.
Rob, looking forward, what are you looking at doing with pick which one you want, economic freedom of the world or North America, the things you're looking to do to increase kinds of uses, take it whichever direction you'd like to go.
Sure. So on the Economic Freedom of the World project, it's been around for a very long time,
right.
And in a sense, the learning curve is flattened. So, with that said, there are always data challenges. Data challenges are the ongoing concern of any index operation. For us, the biggest current challenge is that the doing business project at the global level was canceled by the World Bank a couple years ago, and so I'm now leading an effort to try to relaunch that project privately, and it's in the process of ruining my life, actually. And so just managing data problems, but those are sort of dog bites man kind of things. It's just normal, data comes, data goes. You got to manage it as it happens. The Economic Freedom of North America report the biggest issue on the table for that set of authors. Now, I'm only tangentially associated with them, although the lead author, Dean Stansel, works for me, so I guess I'm more than tangential to the project. But the EFNA, the Economic Freedom of North America, their biggest challenge is that they integrate, so again, they're doing Mexican states, Canadian provinces, and United States. And the problem there is on the regulatory front, and you're seeing it here with your doing business North America, is that getting comparable regulatory data or property rights data for subnational units across 3 nation states has turned out to be more than a small problem. It's not terribly difficult for, say, the United States to get measures of the efficiency of the Texas court system in adjudicating a contract dispute versus Vermont. But trying to get Texas, Vermont, and Alberta and Chihuahua and a kind of an apples to apples to apples data set has turned out to be really a problem. So we have expended quite a lot of our time and efforts to trying to think about this. We're getting there, but I think in the next 10 years, the goal for EFNA is to either integrate doing business North America type data or but whatever. But it's got, we have, that product has to do a better job of handling the regulatory thing. We do the tax thing just fine. The power to tax is the power to destroy. We handle the tax problem just fine. I can get tax data for Chihuahua. That's not a problem. What we can't get is, the regulatory stuff.
Yeah, and that became very clear to us. We met with one of the newly elected members in one of the Mexican states, and she wanted, really clear information about the sources of the data, the comparison points with other Mexican states, and we had to say it's really difficult to get access to the data and get access to correct data, and that was right before COVID happened. Like literally, walked out of that meeting, and 2 days later, the university announced that it was going all virtual. So we haven't revisited it, but that's certainly the kinds of issues, same kind of issues. So yeah. I'd like to thank both Rob and Jorge for being here and for illuminating to us some of the challenges of thinking about how we measure economic freedom and the degrees of economic freedom that different locations have. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.